Hey there, this is Spirits and Cousins. I'm Tish.
And I'm Courtney.
And this is our first episode. We're doing this podcast because we both are interested in both spirits, the kind you can drink and the kind you can talk to.
Yes.
And we're also cousins. So we thought it would be fun. Courtney has been very involved in paranormal, energy work, investigations, anything and everything to do with how we live holistically and the energy and spirits that guide us through life.
Yeah.
Basically.
Mm-hmm. It's a good synopsis.
So we thought in this first episode it would make sense to talk a little bit about how we got interested in this. And of course, I'm going to start off by saying I am very new to this. I am more curious and learning from Courtney. So I'm going to let Courtney go first and talk about how you got involved in just, energy. And then with that paranormal, you've got some great stories from when you were back in Minnesota. How did you get started in this?
Well, when I was in my 20s, I had noticed something was just different about me. And I'd known it since I was a child, but couldn't put it into words. And I started just trying to research and talk with people. And I couldn't quite pinpoint what was different. And then I met with some people who were Wiccan. And I had talked with them about how when I would walk into a room, and if I was happy but someone was stressed out, I could feel that energy. And I would start feeling stressed out. And I learned that was being an empath. And so I worked with them to figure out how I could not be so taken over by other people's emotions. And I'm a pretty strong empath, so I still deal with that and working through it. But it's a lot better since I started working with energy and figuring it out. And then I started deep diving more into metaphysics and intuitive work and things like that. And I had some medical issues, and one referred me to a Reiki energy healer. I went to the Reiki energy healer, and she removed some energy that was causing the medical issues. And I was like, whoa, what the heck is this? And she said, well, you're a healer too. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she said, do you always often want to touch people, like their shoulders or their arms? And I said, yeah. She's like, do you notice your hands getting warm? And I said, yeah. And she said, do you notice that the kids gravitate towards you? Yes. Animals too. And she said, well, you're an energy healer, and recommended that I get into that. So I got into energy healing. And then in that world, I met more people who were in paranormal stuff. And then I just took it from there, and I met some really neat people who helped me develop some skill sets and discover others. And
was that back in Minnesota?
Yeah, back in Minnesota.
How did you find these people? I mean, you're interested, so let me just guess. You're interested, you're already doing some energy work and building that for yourself. Then part of that is what got you kind of into the paranormal stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How'd you find people? I mean, it's not something you go on Craigslist or
what do you know? It all started with this Wiccan community, and I'm not Wiccan, but they understood what I was talking about where no one else did. And then, like I said, as I got into the energy work and paranormal go hand in hand, that intuitive mediumship things. And I met this woman named Katie, and hopefully she'll come on this podcast at some point. Katie from Minnesota. And Katie is the one who helped me develop even more of my skills. And she did a ghost tour in the Riverside area of Minneapolis, and I'd go on the tour with her and I'd take photos. And I would show her my photos, and she would say, that's really different. I've never seen people getting all these photos like this. And I was like, what are you talking about? This is different. No one gets things in their photos? And she's like, no, that's really odd and cool. I was like, okay. What happens is I take photos, and orbs come through and different beings come through. I have a photo of an angel and an elemental, fairy, and a troll, and all these really cool, colorful orbs. And so that's how I started getting into it.
how does the paranormal fit into it? So the orbs are kind of energies outside of our body, and then the paranormal, which I don't know. I mean, I'm learning this stuff as I go, but the paranormal piece is actually a separate grouping of energy and spirits, isn't it? Versus orbs and things like that, or are they all part of the same thing?
It's all part of the same thing. So what I found is that these orbs are either their souls or their beings that perhaps have never been on Earth, and they are able to often, not always, but communicate too. And so that's kind of how it comes full circle. But also mediumship is part of the metaphysical intuitive world. And mediumship is being able to talk to beings from the other side who have passed on.
And then from there, you ended up participating with a group of friends or a group that actually was doing paranormal investigations in and around the Minneapolis area.
Yeah, in the Twin Cities. Yes, there's a group of us that would get together. We mostly did outdoors venues, but not solely. And we would get some really neat things at the Indian burial mounds in St. Paul, also at the ones in Minneapolis by that ghost tour that I would go on. And there's a couple different buildings we did. We did this really cool Concord building in South Minneapolis. And I have some really odd stories about that.
Well, that's going to be good because we're gonna need some of those stories. I mean, it's kind of what got you into it, and then here I come along. So just to back up a bit, in case you haven't figured this out, Courtney's from Minneapolis. We've been talking about what she was doing in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, the West Coast was calling to her, and so she came out here to the West Coast. And we're cousins, and she actually now lives near me. Little did she know that coming out to the West Coast, and we're here in the northern kind of Big Sur area, there's a lot of haunted places around here.
A lot.
And we've already had some experiences, but I do want to say that I don't have the background that Courtney does. And one of the reasons this is so interesting for both of us is I'm just learning, number one. And number two, I'm really interested in the technology that allows you to communicate with spirits and energy and other things that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm always like wanting to understand, this spirit box or flashlight. And so I think what will be fun about what we do on this podcast is we're going to talk a lot about stories and experiences, and we're also going to talk about investigations that we plan on doing.
Mm-hmm.
And as they come up, we'll walk people through kind of, this is what we're going to do next. We're going to go here. We're going to go to this lighthouse or whatever it is we're going to do. We're going to talk about that. But we're also going to use this podcast as an opportunity to talk about all the technology that comes out. I know that everybody that listens to this is going to know that they probably watch some of these shows on TV, whether it be Ghost Adventures. What was the very first one we've talked about before?
Paranormal State.
Paranormal State, and there's a ton, and I know Kindred Spirits. Yep. There's quite a bit. Jack Osborne's got a show. There's a ton of them out there, and one of the things that if you start watching those, I think that everyone's curious about is what is it they're using? And they go in one of these investigations, they've got like a ton of equipment, and some of it you recognize. It could be like a microphone or a recorder.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's other things that you look at and you're like, where in the hell did that come from? What is that thing?
What is that? And they don't usually talk about it.
They don't.
And
I think it's like some secret. Is it like some secret, like here's the equipment and you can see it, but we can't talk about it because they never do.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because they are sponsored by it, so that the company, so they won't discuss it. I don't really know. I think it's odd, but I think it's good to have discussions of equipment because we've had just interesting experiences with equipment where sometimes the old school stuff works better, and then sometimes the new stuff works better.
Yeah,
so that'll be fun.
So we're gonna talk about that on here too, and the other thing that we decided when we were going to do this podcast, and actually, this was really Courtney's idea, was that we were going to call it Spirits and Cousins. Spirits, because you can read into that as a pun, in that, yes, we're going to talk about spirits, we're going to talk about paranormal, we're going to talk about the shows on TV, investigations, but we're also going to start the podcast off with, what spirit are we drinking this week? And talk a little bit about spirits. In this case, we both appreciate and like our bourbon. So it'll be probably bourbon most of the time, but maybe during the summer it might be a gin and tonic or something.
Yeah, but maybe a martini.
That's right. So that's Spirits and Cousins. And so you kind of heard, I am going to say, I'm not just propping you up, but it's the reality, Courtney, is that you have literally years of experience with energy work in general. Mm-hmm. So this is just kind of like another flavor of it. I'm always asking Courtney about how to do this or what about this, and she always has to explain the different types of energies. And in this second episode, that this will really be kind of Courtney's show, in that she's going to talk about those different definitions of energy. However, this first episode, just want to cover the fact that I don't know nearly as much as Courtney. I kind of help and am very interested in the technology. I have a few stories that we're going to share that are pretty cool, and it's definitely worth listening to. But Courtney has just a ton of the experience. So I guess I'll be left with making sure we get this recorded, it gets edited, it's all ready to go on. And but I'm going to be talking about the technology more than anything, and I'll be asking you questions, Courtney, like that I think people listening are going to want to know, like, why this, why that, like, what's the difference between a non-Earth being and what was that thing when we were outside that
elemental
night? An elemental,
or it was an earth
or a troll, or it's a lot of cool stuff. So I think that the big picture when we think about what we're going to do on here is going to be stories and experiences. It's going to be discussions of other investigations. It's going to be reviews of paranormal technology, and it's going to be about what spirits we're enjoying as we're doing that.
Well, and I think the thing too is that I've been doing this for a while, but at the same time, what I know is a tiny drop. And so the cool thing about this too is we'll be able to even talk about what we're learning and growing in.
Yeah.
Both of us, whether it's technology, whether it's with the paranormal and spirits, we're both learning always. And so that's what's going to be fun too, is we can all learn and grow together.
And with that, again, this being our first, so I'm going to back up a bit. Courtney came out to California a few years ago. And she has been tracking and researching some of the destinations on the West Coast here, particularly in California, around where we are, that have activity. And funny enough, we're here, as I mentioned, in Northern California on the coast here, between Santa Cruz and Pebble Beach. And funny enough, more recently, Ghost Adventures came to my little town of Pacific Grove to do an investigation. And as I was watching that, and Courtney and I were texting about it, I'm like, we should get on, we should talk about this stuff. But there's a lot of hauntings and activity around this area, mostly because, probably like back east now, it's been 150 years. You have had a huge Asian population when this was a fishing area. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a lot of energy and spirits here. I live in a house that was built in 1883 or 1884. And, you'd think there'd be a lot going on, but there isn't a whole lot in this house, is there?
We've talked how a lot of it's been transient, just like coming through, not necessarily. We talked briefly with Mary Miller, the woman who originally owned your lot and house. And so, and and it was a big fishing area.
Yep.
Way back when, and I believe there were some, and I'll have to research this more, but but there's a lot. And Monterey used to be the capital of California. And so we have the jailhouse. We have that one jailhouse here, and we have
which we went to the jailhouse, and we couldn't get anything. And we went there at night, and it was late at night. But but as Courtney pointed out to me, just like when we went to Alcatraz, as you pointed out to me, even spirits don't want to be in jail. They don't want to be stuck there.
Yeah.
They're free to go wherever they want if they're here.
And if they're not found,
Yeah, so why would they want to go to a jail?
Yeah, a lot of it, I think, is that residual energy, where when we went to the Alcatraz solitary confinement, how you felt so stifled, like there's something on your chest, and that's that residual energy of the people who were in there, that anger and that sadness.
I remember we had a few conversations, but it could have been because there was like 200 other people around that it wasn't very active. I think it's all very interesting because not many podcasts and not many folks that do this want to share. And I always ask Courtney, I don't understand, why don't they talk about what they use, what worked best? And then you watch these shows on TV and they're trying like 10 different things. Well, we've been in that position where we've hauled everything out that Courtney has. And what we end up finding more times than not, it's the simple tools that work the best. The flashlights, the dowsing rods, the pendulum. Sometimes the EMF work. But so you're gonna hear that. You're gonna hear that all on here. And I think before we kind of end this first episode, since it's probably going to be more of a short one, maybe we tell the story of when we went to Point Pinos, the lighthouse here in Pacific Grove. Because that's not a long story. We couldn't talk about it for a whole episode anyway.
No.
But that was one of the first times, I will tell you, when there was no excuse or no explanation for what was happening, except we were having like a full-blown conversation with
Emily Fish. Mm-hmm. With Emily Fish, who was one of the lightkeepers of Point Pinos.
So Point Pinos is a small little lighthouse here in Pacific Grove. It's also open to the public to tour. And over the years, it's had many lighthouse keepers. And one of them was this female, Emily Fish. And I don't know how you figured that out, because we got there, and did you know who you were going to be calling out?
I didn't do any research beforehand.
When we got there, it was just a voice that came through.
It was a voice that came through, and as we were talking with her, then we did a little bit of research just to try and pinpoint who she was. And so we had figured out that it was very likely was Emily Fish, who was the socialite lightkeeper. She loved entertaining guests at the lighthouse, and she served as a lightkeeper from 1893 to 1914.
And she came through when we went there. It was late at night. She came through because you asked, "Is this a male or a female?" And then you asked, "Is this a lighthouse keeper?" Mm-hmm. You basically asked a whole series of questions, which, by the way, were coming through loud and clear. And she was answering. That was through the spirit box, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. It was through the spirit box, and it was a female voice coming through. It was a female voice coming through, and through your questions, you were able to figure out that, one, it was a lighthouse keeper, two, it was a female, and then you started looking up, like, who could this be? And then you asked if it was her, and she answered yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. That was freaky. When that happened, where you're having like a full-blown conversation and they're responding quickly.
Yeah, that quick responding time is fascinating to me, because sometimes you get people who are or spirits that are slower to respond, and she was pretty good.
one of the things that comes up, especially in this area that has such a deep history, like my house is well over 100 years old. I always ask Courtney, I always ask her, do you think some of these spirits that haven't been here in kind of the modern day and the modern age, do they know how to communicate? Like, how would they know how to spell something out like you can on some of these EMF spirit boxes? How would they know how to use their energy for something that is more modern, whether it be choosing a yes or no answer on a screen or spelling something out, but knowing how and when to use the energy to do it? I always question that, because I think that folks that might have passed or aren't with us any longer, that are in the last like 10, 20 years, would be so familiar with all this technology. But folks that are, spirits and entities that we're talking to that haven't been here for 100 years, how do they know how to use this stuff?
That's a great question, and that's why. And when we were talking about it the other day, I do think we need to teach them. And we've been explaining to the spirits how to use that, but they do seem to, at least right now, gravitate towards the older things like the dowsing rods and pendulums and
Right.
and it's technology has come really far in a short time period. When I first started all the ghost stuff, which was 15-ish years ago, I think.
Yeah. Dowsing rods and pendulums.
I mean, I used dowsing rods and pendulums and the EMF reader. And
they had
light. Yeah, we had the one with that lights up with the different colors. And spirit boxes were around, but they were very expensive. And so you just use those or your intuition and receives the information that way. But I, by day I work with behavior. And so I do think that it is important to be skeptical and to try and also prove that this just isn't something you're making up or something that could be actually here on Earth rather than in the spirit world.
I do notice, I definitely do notice that with you, that my intuition would tell me that you are probably more of a feeling kind of person, but yet you are always challenging the legitimacy of what we hear, what we think we hear. And this brings up something, when we talk about what we've experienced and Courtney talks about what she's experienced, it's kind of like we cancel out things that come through the equipment that aren't clear. Mm-hmm. Because if any of you have ever watched any of these shows, you hear something come through and then they tell you what it's saying. And I think your mind bends around the words they're saying, and then it naturally goes, oh yeah, I hear that they're saying that. But really, you can't really many times tell, if they didn't tell you what was being said, would you really know what was being said?
Most of the time I can't.
Yeah.
I couldn't pick out what they tell us they
Me
think
neither.
it is.
And then sometimes you hear something clear. So the reason I'm bringing this up is when we talk about this on this show, it's going to be clear words, and we'll be sure. And if part of the story, maybe something didn't come through clearly, you're going to say this didn't come through too clearly, but right before, we heard this word, this word, because I don't know, how everyone else feels out there, but I wonder if some of this stuff wasn't suggested, would you really hear those words the way they are? So I think you have a really good dose of skepticism with it to make sure it's real. And I'm a pretty factual person myself, so I want to hear those specific words. And if you have to explain those words to somebody else, they're probably not clear enough to understand to begin with.
Yeah. Unlike when we heard, "Hi, Tish."
Oh yes, that'll be an interesting. That will be an interesting story.
Me. That's what we heard like 2 weeks-ish ago.
Yeah.
Someone say me.
Yeah. So, we've got some family members, and Courtney's talked to some family members, and it's funny because the thing that surprises me the most is how often their voice comes through the equipment as their voice. Mm-hmm. And yet one of the things I learned from Courtney is that usually on a spirit box, it's not necessarily their voice.
No, they're using the radio waves. Yeah. They're using that frequency to be able to talk with us. So it's whatever they can figure out.
So we have a lot. We're going to have a lot of different subjects to keep everyone interested and engaged. And you're going to hear the real deal. We're going to unpack how this stuff happens, how investigations are done, the technology, and then most importantly, our own experiences, mostly Courtney's experiences.
And both of our experiences.
Yeah, I
do this a lot together.
Yeah, I'm getting some experience. The thing is that I'm an unconscious competent in that I don't, like, I can kind of tell, but I don't know what you know, so I'm always asking questions. But I'm getting a little better, and
You're getting really, like, you're definitely feeling the energy more, because I remember when we were in Oregon and you said, we need to do stuff outside, not in the house.
Oh, yeah.
And you were really like, no, we really need to. And I was like, why? You're like, I don't know. I just feel that we need to be outside and do it. Well, and that's when we got that.
Oh, my God.
Elemental earth being talking to us.
Okay, we're not going to cover that.
No.
But we went to Oregon. I went to go visit some friends for Thanksgiving, and I said, Courtney, come on, you're going to go up there with me. It's right on a river in the woods, and it's like, I kept saying I feel like I'm in The Hobbit or something. I mean, It was that kind of, and it was moist and raining, and we get there, and it was just crazy with energy.
Yeah.
With all kinds of stuff going on. So we're going to talk about, that will be a whole episode to talk about the Oregon trip and what we found out.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a lot of stuff to cover. Again, you know, we've got our experiences, things we're planning on doing. We're also going to pick apart and probably recap some shows as we watch some of that stuff. And then again, technology and bourbon. There's a lot going on.
There's a lot.
But it all is around paranormal and energy stuff, investigations, and the technology.
It's a little bit of liquor tossed in there.
That's right. Yes, spirit.
We like our spirit.
So we are going to try to do this at least every other week and come up with some really cool stuff that you want to hear about. And we are going to set up so you can send us your ideas and questions. What are you thinking? Are you going to do that on like Facebook? Are we going to have an email address?
I think we should do an email address. We talked about YouTube channel.
Yep.
Because some of our things, the flashlights and the pendulum.
Yes.
And the death, those are very visual instruments. Yes. And so I think we need to do also some YouTube stuff so people can see that what we're doing and what we have.
Yes. I have to do one step at a time, like as far as using a camera versus just doing the audio podcast. But I think that we should also set up a Facebook page.
Yeah. Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Spirits and Cousins. Thank you for joining us today. It's our first episode. Courtney, say goodbye.
See ya. It's going to be fun.
And until next time, take care, be open.
Enjoy your spirit.
And enjoy your spirits, whatever they may be.